I hadn't planned on going back there, not really. But when my cousin called about my aunt's passing, and the funeral being held back in the neighborhood I hadn't seen in almost a decade, I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. There's something about returning to a place that once felt like home. It messes with you. You walk the same cracked sidewalks, see the same rusted fences, and your brain starts filling in all the gaps you thought you'd forgotten. The old house stood the same, like it had been frozen in time. Peeling white paint, sagging porch, and the same oak tree out front that we used to climb as kids. Only now, everything felt smaller, like it had shrunk in my absence. Parked down the street and walked. I didn't even need to check the address. Muscle memory guided my feet straight to the gate. I didn't expect to see her. Alex. She stepped out of her car just as I reached the gate. Her eyes locked. No hug, no awkward greeting. Just silence. That kind of silence where 100 things want to be said, but none of them come out clean. She looked different. Not older exactly, just more grounded. Like life had changed her and she'd settled into it, while I was still playing catch-up with the past. "You're here," she said. "I heard about your mom," I replied. "I'm sorry." She nodded and we stood there. Same driveway, same air. But we were different people. She told me the house was mostly empty now. Her father moved out 2 years ago, and no one had been in it for months. She had the keys and asked if I wanted to go inside just to see it again. Against better judgment, I said yes. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would help me process things. Maybe I wanted to feel close to something that once mattered. Inside was a time capsule. The living room still had that odd musty scent of old cushions and wood polish. There was dust, sure, but the bones of the place were the same. My hand brushed the banister we used to slide down as kids. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter that belonged to another lifetime. Talk. Small things at first. Life, jobs, the usual fake updates people give when they don't know how honest to be. Then her tone shifted. Softer. "You ever think about those summers?" she asked. I did. More than I'd admit. She made coffee. I wandered the kitchen. She pointed out how the wallpaper still hadn't been replaced. I laughed. We sat at the table. It was familiar in a way that made my chest ache. "I come here sometimes just to remember," she said. "Even when I know I probably shouldn't." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Then she said it. "You can stay a while if you want." It wasn't just a suggestion. Felt like a door opening. I didn't know what was waiting behind it, but I stepped in anyway. The quiet stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that let memories slip in without needing permission. Every room we walked through pulled up something buried. Something warm, something sharp. I followed her into the hallway, where we once stood arguing about the dumbest things, swearing we'd never speak again, only to end up back in each other's arms the next day. That kind of history doesn't fade. It lingers. She poured another cup of coffee, and her hand brushed mine for a second too long. She didn't pull away quickly. I noticed the ring on her finger when she turned back toward the counter. Thin band, modest design. She didn't mention it and I didn't ask. But it sat there like a quiet warning. Still, something about the way she looked at me felt like we'd never left this place. The way her voice softened when she asked how long I'd be in town. The way she kept catching my eye, then looking away. It wasn't innocent. We both knew that. She started talking about her husband in a way that wasn't really talking about him. Just enough detail to let me know things weren't right. Words like distant, tired, and not the same. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to offer. I wasn't here to fix her life, and I wasn't sure I even had the right to be part of it anymore. But when she sat down next to me on the old couch, her shoulder brushing mine, the silence grew heavier. My heart was thudding for reasons I didn't want to acknowledge. She looked at me like she was trying to find something she'd lost a long time ago. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you stayed?" she asked. "All the time." Instead I said, "We were kids. We didn't know what we were doing." "Yeah," she whispered. "But it felt real, didn't it?" He nodded. That part was never in question. It was past midnight. Neither of us had moved from the couch. The lights were low. The tension hung between us like a thread stretched too tight. I stood up, half thinking I should go, but she caught my hand. "Don't," she said. "Not yet." I sat back down. She leaned in, slow, cautious, like waiting for me to stop her. I didn't. Her lips met mine, soft at first, then urgent. It wasn't just about lust. It was about missing something we both tried to bury. A kind of sadness wrapped in desire. When we finally pulled apart, she looked like she wanted to apologize but didn't. I didn't give her the chance. I knew right then that something had shifted. Whatever we had reopened couldn't be undone. And whatever line we just crossed, there was no walking it back. The morning after didn't feel like regret right away. It felt like confusion. I woke up on that couch, blanket half draped over me, sunlight leaking through the curtains. She was in the kitchen, quiet, like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't crossed every line we swore we never would. I sat up, my mouth dry, head buzzing with everything we didn't say. She offered coffee like it was just another morning, her voice steady. But there was a shift in the way she avoided eye contact, the way she stayed on the opposite side of the room. I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. A message popped up. His name. Her husband. "I didn't expect him back until tomorrow," she said, eyes still on the coffee mug. The tension returned fast. Heavy. Dark. "What happens now?" I asked. I shrugged. "Nothing. This doesn't change anything." But it did. She walked past me, saying she needed to go freshen up before he arrived. I stood there, mug in hand, realizing I had no idea who she really was anymore. Everything I thought we had last night now felt like a blurred line between honesty and manipulation. I paced, trying to reason with myself. Maybe it was just two people revisiting something that should have stayed buried. Maybe we were both broken in the right places to fit for one night. But then I opened the guest room door and saw the suitcase. His suitcase. He was already back. The shower was running upstairs, but there were 2 coffee cups on the nightstand. 2 pillows dented. Someone else had already been here. That's when it clicked. I wasn't the only one. She came downstairs like nothing was wrong. I asked her calmly, "Was he here last night?" She froze. Just for a second. That was enough. "You think you're the first?" she asked quietly. "You think this was some kind of reunion story?" The words hit harder than they should have. "So what was it then?" I asked. "Comfort. Familiarity. Distraction. No apology. No shame. Just truth, cold and matter-of-fact." I wanted to be angry, but mostly I felt hollow. Like I'd been holding on to some idea of her that hadn't existed in years. "You invited me in knowing this," I said. She nodded. "I didn't expect anything from you. You came willingly." Left. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I just walked out feeling like a fool. The past has a way of dressing up in nostalgia, making it look safer than it is. But under all that warmth and memory, it's still sharp, still capable of cutting. I realized I wasn't just cheated with. I'd been part of the betrayal. And the worst part, I let it happen. I didn't go back to the funeral. I couldn't sit there surrounded by people pretending everything was fine while my mind was stuck in that house in that night. I checked into a small motel on the edge of town, needed space to think, to process how easily the past had wrapped around me and pulled me under. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how something that once felt so pure had turned into something that made me feel so small. There was no message from her. No call. Just silence. Which told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't special. I was convenient. A familiar face in a moment of weakness. Or maybe just the next name on a quiet list of emotional missteps she wasn't done making. I kept replaying her words. "You think you're the first." I did. And maybe that was the most painful part. That I let myself believe it meant something. That all those years of wondering what if had led to nothing more than being used as a temporary escape. I thought I'd be angry. I wasn't. Just numb. Love doesn't always die clean. Sometimes it rots slowly out of sight, until all that's left is the memory of how good it once felt. I came back looking for closure, maybe even a little hope. What I found was a version of her I didn't recognize. Someone willing to burn everything just to feel something new. And me. Played along. I stepped into the fire thinking I'd find warmth, not realizing I was just fuel. The next morning I drove past the old neighborhood one last time. Didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Just watched it fade in the rearview like it should have years ago. The past belongs in the past, no matter how much it calls to you. Somewhere along the drive, I realized I wasn't heartbroken. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that I'd confused history with love. That I thought returning to something old would give me something new. Doesn't work like that. Some things are broken because they're supposed to be. She messaged me a week later. Just one line. Hope you're okay. I stared at it, didn't respond. What was there to say? I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was done. That house will always be there. That version of us will always live in my memory. Frozen in time like we never grew up. But I'm not going back. Not to her. Not to who I was. We think closure comes from answers. Sometimes it comes from walking away without them. She gave me one last gift though, clarity. The kind you only get after everything's fallen apart. I learned that love without respect is just possession. And nostalgia is a liar dressed in comfort. Next time the past knocks, I won't answer. Some ghosts don't deserve to be let in.